Today we're talking to Christopher Miers, Managing Director of Probyn Miers and past President of the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation. And we're going to be discussing dispute avoidance. So Chris, the move from dispute resolution to dispute avoidance on projects, why is that so important?
I think it's really critical because in our industry of construction we don't do enough to be proactive in how we manage the inevitable disagreements to prevent them escalating into disputes. Once we have a dispute, of course, it's already damaging. It's nearly always impacting on project delivery, it's impacting on constructive relationships within the project team, and it's likely to be affecting time and cost in terms of successful project outcome. So we need to do more at an early stage of the project. And if we look, for example, at the kind of loss of value investment in disputes, what we see, if you look around the world, is that there are, of course, billions of dollars, billions of pounds, euros being lost in disputes. And an Australian survey from around 2006 concluded that just under 6% of overall investment was being lost to disputes. We don't have hard data from many parts of the world, but if you take a figure of half of that, 3%, it's still a massive figure that's being taken away from successful project delivery. So we need to be doing more, Ed, in terms of what we can do then to manage what is a process that we know in our industry of construction. Disagreements arise. I mean, we have complex programs, we have multiple stakeholders, difficult interfaces to manage, and we know in practice that disagreements will arise. They need to be managed. We tend to sit back and start the managing process once we have the problem. What I'm saying is we need to be coming in on these things earlier. We're managing the beginning of the gestation of the disagreement to avoid it then escalating to a dispute.
So practically on projects, what is it we should be doing, do you think?
I think if we think about projects in the three main phases, the first phase, of course, is really the pre-tender phase. It's normally early design, getting the project through to the stage where we can effectively procure it to the market. And we tend to understand that process well. Our second stage then is really the pricing stage, where the bidders, contractors, are evaluating risk. They're pricing risk on the project. And again, it's another key area where we need to allow appropriate time and process for the contractors properly to evaluate the risk they're taking on. But the area that I'm focusing on is actually the final third phase, which is the construction phase, and the phase where there's construction and often detailed design through design, bid, build, procurement. And in that phase, in the construction phase, of course, we move into a much more complex area where we've got a massive increase in the number of stakeholders on the project, and we've got hundreds, maybe thousands of parties involved in the successful procurement for specialist design, supply and installation. And we've got complex programs with multiple interfaces, all of which give rise to the potential for disagreements to arise, misunderstandings, different interpretations of contract data. And so we, at the moment, on the majority of projects, we give insufficient attention to providing an effective, proactive process forming part of the contractual mechanism for managing the escalation of those disagreements. If we look at what's happening around the world, what we'll see is that there are processes that have become well established. If we take the US market to start with, the use of dispute boards in the US, for example, has been now developed over the last sort of 20 years or so on thousands of projects now, very successfully, to help in managing and avoiding disagreements escalating into disputes. If we look at elsewhere worldwide, Australia, many parts of Africa, so Central Asia, Far East areas, again, major infrastructure projects will almost certainly incorporate the use of dispute boards on a standing basis. What this means is right from the beginning of the project, you initiate a process whereby you bring in a neutral panel of experts who will meet regularly with all the stakeholders on the prime contract throughout the project to help identify and facilitate resolution of issues as they're arising and before they escalate. And we have also very good tools in the UK, for example, the conflict avoidance panel, which is in place on the Transport for London Crossrail stations programme. And then we look at things like Resolex radar, which provides an effective early warning monitoring process, which has the benefit of really drilling down through the layers of key stakeholders beyond the main contract parties. And so what we need to have is mechanisms like this, and I'm a great proponent of dispute boards as a way, as from the beginning of the project, having in place a process whereby specialist neutrals bring their expertise to meet with everybody around the table, discuss the critical areas that could impact negatively on effective project procurement and how those are going to be resolved before they start to have a causative effect on time and cost and quality.
So all of these processes that you talk about, the CAP, a standing dispute board, our own radar service, they all have a cost. So how do you stand on the cost versus benefits?
This is a regular question, cost versus benefits. Let's look at the benefits first. We know from the limited statistical analysis which is available that if we take, for example, in the United States, the Department of Transport in Florida initiated a 3-year study to compare projects with and without dispute review boards. And the outcome was very interesting. What they found was that the projects with dispute boards were not only avoiding disputes, but they were also more successful in meeting the cost and time targets. And so the employer was getting a direct benefit, not only in the avoiding having to then initiate arbitration proceedings or respond to that, but also they were saving in terms of project delivery cost and time. And so as a consequence of that, of course, the dispute boards became much more widely used on many transportation projects. And we see the same if we look at the analysis from Australia, for example, where again they've conducted surveys, and there's publication on this from the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation website, which is that projects that incorporate this process, people tend to give better focus to the overall management of the project. They tend to avoid the divergence of attention into the need to resolve disputes which have escalated. And we find that projects are delivered more effectively. And this is my personal experience where, I mean, I've worked on numerous projects where when I come to the project as a dispute board member and I meet with the parties and perhaps with 2 colleagues, and we have a roundtable meeting and we hear from the contractor, we hear from the owner, we hear from the engineer, and we discuss matters of concern, and we discuss the issues which are beginning to impact on the critical path, how they're being managed. We are proactive in suggesting ways that they can be dealt with in a constructive way. And we know from experience that this really pushes the parties into a more collaborative relationship. And collaboration, of course, we all aim for it, but quite often we need additional facilitation to help it happen. And this is where the dispute board has a great success. And so we see the benefits of that are delivered directly in terms of project success. So if we compare those with the cost, and I mentioned earlier some of the analysis of the actual cost that's being lost onto disputes, and for anyone who's actually been involved in a dispute, you will know how not only is there the financial cost, but there's a huge divergence of your key resources onto dealing with managing the dispute process and bringing the claim, dealing with witness statements, gathering documents. There's a massive divergence away from the core business of design and construction. So apart from that, though, the actual cost of bringing the dispute board onto the project will vary, but our analysis, our statistics, indicates that the typical cost of a dispute board for a domestic project will be somewhere in the region of 0.1% to 0.3%, that sort of range. So somewhere in the order of, a tenth of 1% would be typical. A standing board, particularly on an international project, may be more expensive when you're having to fly members in from around the world and pay for additional travel time and accommodation. And so we might see costs of perhaps 0.5%. I would say that we know that where projects have particular differences, then those parameters may be changed. And I've been dealing with one at the moment where we anticipate that the cost of the dispute board will be, for an international board, about 0.05% of the project cost. And this is where the board is working across multiple joint venture contracts, almost like an umbrella board, providing its expertise to many different contracts for delivery of the major project. Equally, we also know that on some large and quite controversial projects, costs have increased to something like 1% of project cost. So that will give you some parameters, but you must keep that in the context of the cost of a dispute as well. So apart from all the physical interruption, with a dispute you may well be paying many times that investment if you are then paying for all of the processes of getting to a final arbitration decision.